Everyone. Today we're going to talk about what you need to think about in advance if you're going to hold a virtual reality event in AltspaceVR. So I'm Kathy Moya, word girl on Altspace, and hopefully you've already looked a little bit into what Altspace is. But just in case you're not familiar with it, why would you want to use it? Well, first of all, it gives you a 3D audio effect. So if you're standing in a virtual room represented by your avatar, and there's another avatar standing right next to you, you hear that person really well. But if that person moves their avatar further away from you, you hear them less well, just like in real life. So you actually get a kind of a cocktail-like party experience where you can move around the room and listen to conversations, join in the conversations that you want, and leave the conversations if it's really not suiting you, unlike what you can do in typical video conferencing. The other thing that's fantastic is you get these environments in there. So you can have an event underwater, on a space station, in an ice bar, public or private, and it's all free. So it's a great environment to check out. But there are some things that you need to think about if you're going to do an event in virtual reality. So what we're going to talk about today is really all of the theory about events. We're not going to do any of the practical stuff. I have some other videos on my YouTube channel about how to do some of the things like dressing up your space and how to think about the invitation, the form that you're filling out as you create your event. But what we're going to talk about here is the stuff that you need to kind of think about and know as you're planning everything. So some basic considerations, thinking about how you're going to handle the number of people within your space. And then really important, especially if you're doing professional events like I do, is the access control and privacy. So starting with event considerations, we'll talk about some of the basics that you want to think about, roadblocks about why people may not be able to get in, inclusivity, and support. Very important thing here. So creating an event. I have a whole video that goes through all of the options extensively in the event form that you can fill out. And I have another video that takes you through all of the templates. So I'm not going to spend any time here talking about what to do, but there's just a couple of quick tips here pulled out of that video if you're interested. I think virtual reality is awesome. I think everybody should be in it. But for some reason, not everybody seems to agree. There seems to be a lot of roadblock in terms of getting people into virtual reality in the first place. And if you were doing an event in real life, people would say things like, oh, it's too far, it's too expensive, it's too much hassle. So, like, this is a screenshot from the last Microsoft Ignite conference that we had in person in Orlando, which was, very far and expensive for some people to get to. But still, people show up at those events because there is something incredible happening there. And so, really, when we're thinking about virtual reality, the roadblocks you're going to get, well, it's not too far, but I don't want to install another app. Or, it's not expensive, it's all free, but I don't want to install another account. Or it could be expense in the terms of, I don't have a VR headset, or VR headsets are too expensive, or VR isn't relevant for me. VR is for, like those bleeding edge kind of people. It's not something mainstream that I would be interested in. So you're going to have to think about your audience and how you're going to overcome some of these roadblocks. One of the things that can help in terms of managing another account is Altspace now allows you to do single sign-on using what we call an MSA or a Microsoft account. So used to be called a Hotmail account. And that gives them a little bit faster uptake into onboarding. And of course, you don't have to use a VR headset to do all of this. I do most of my VR in 2D, and the app, both Mac and PC, is totally free. And I didn't think that VR was relevant to me until I actually got into VR and experienced it for the first time. So we'll talk a little bit more about some other ways to address some of these roadblocks. But another thing that you have to think about is technically, people may have difficulty getting into your event. So it does support PC and Mac for free, but there is no mobile support at this point or Linux support at this point. I talked about it, but right now it's that, or you have to have one of the supported headsets. If you're going to use your Mac or your PC, but people are on a company-owned device for a professional event, the store may be blocked for access. And so there are some ways around it, but it's going to involve getting the IT department there. If people can use a personal device to access the event, even though it's work related, that may work well. I have a gaming rig that I use because something with better uh, graphical processing unit GPU is going to be better when you're doing something like AltSpace. But if they're really blocked, if all they have is that company device, they may not be able to get into your event. And there may be other types of security restrictions in place. So I was just talking with some people today who are saying, yeah, if you're dealing with, financial or government, those people may not be able to install the AltSpace app. But some of the things that you can think about, if they can get over the technical roadblocks, is make something exciting so that they really want to get in there. I went to an anniversary party for SharePoint, and they had all the big Microsoft names in there. And I saw a lot of people who were in there in 2D who I think were probably in AltSpace for their very first time, because that program was just, all the big names. If you're going to do something like, very often I'll do my regular event in Microsoft Teams, but then as a separate thing, I'll do some kind of a social piece. And if I'm going to do that, I may try to get people to install the app ahead of time. I never plan on it. I know that most of the people aren't going to read the invite and aren't going to do the work ahead of time. But if you can, um, anything that you can do to kind of get them ahead of the curve. So one of the things I've seen people do very successfully is have people do some kind of a quest before the actual event. So maybe the thing is going to happen on Tuesday. So on Monday, you make sure everybody is installed and you tell them, go into the event space and take a picture with what you find next to the popcorn machine. And then, have some kind of a fun world building thing set up there. And then you can tell who's actually gone in and done the quest and who hasn't. If you're going to be doing a major event or some kind of a conference, try having some small social gatherings or onboarding events before the main event, because you don't want people showing up where something's supposed to start at 8 a.m. and they show up at 8 a.m. looking at their invite going, oh, wait, I have to install all of this stuff, and they're just not prepared. So schedule something first that they can see and use that as a way to, to gradually onboard them. The other thing that I can't stress enough that I have found in trying to do these professional events with people who just aren't used to virtual reality is I always start in whatever platform they're used to using. So I work at Microsoft, not in the Altspace group, but I'm there. I use Teams for everything. So I'm going to start all of my things in Teams. If I was doing something external with a group that does stuff in Zoom, I would start in Zoom. And that's what I would give everybody in terms of the invitation. So they show up to Teams, they show up to Zoom, then I walk them through the onboarding process. Then I give them the link to get into the event. Or now that we have event codes, I would give them the code to get in. Or if I'm going to be using groups, as I'll talk about later, I get them added to the group in that lobby environment before proceeding into the actual event. And then that lobby environment becomes your help desk if they have any problems. If all you do is give people the Altspace thing and say show up and they've never done it before, you're going to lose people at the top of that funnel. Now, some things to think about to be welcoming within your event. Like I was saying, if you have that 8 a.m. start time for your content, what I will do is tell everyone the event starts at 7:30 and do a kind of a soft start. Or if I have an hour event that's going to go from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., I will assume that at least the first 20 minutes is going to be taken up with onboarding, and I will put that in the agenda. And then maybe at 3:30, we'll actually start whatever the content is. And then I'll only plan on about 20 minutes of content and then include about 10 minutes of socializing. Because you really want people to start to feel comfortable moving around in that environment. And then as I set up my environment, I try to make it so that when they appear, they spawn in, as I've shown you in some of the other videos, that there's going to be something to include them right away. So I've put over here in the corner where it says instructions, advanced formatting. That's the little pop-up box that you get. And I show this in one of the world building videos. You can put some kind of a welcome message in there. You could put an icebreaker in there that's going to encourage them to get together and start talking to other people as soon as they get in. I have a couple of slides that I do. In fact, I think that deck is in the YouTube channel as well. So I'll have some of those slides posted as they spawn in so that they're looking at something that's going to help them get started right away. Oh, and here's the instruction message, some kind of a signage or icebreaker activity. The other thing that I do with that spawn point is I'll often have a greeter in there. And as people appear in the world, I'll have them say, hi, welcome. And they can see the name tag. So they say, hello, welcome, Llama Socks. Go ahead and unmute by pressing your space bar if you're on a PC, and use your arrow keys to move around. And I'll try to get them walking and talking with the help of that greeter in the event. I also like to put in some of the interactables in my event spaces, usually the quiet ones. I love the fireworks. Everyone loves the fireworks. But if you're actually trying to do things where people can hear each other, the fireworks get very loud. So snowballs are great. Paper airplanes are great. And then I'll even post some text or some signage that show people how to use those interactables and try to get them, kind of enjoying the environment. You can also do things like scavenger hunts around the space and say, hey, go find the paper airplanes and the snowballs. And you might have other greeters who are stationed at those interactables who can help people get up to speed using whatever the technology is. So that's one aspect of inclusivity. But of course, another really important aspect is accessibility. And this is something that is a bit of a struggle with virtual reality. People who are blind are having a difficult time using this environment. I've heard that people who have some types of vision impairments may do better when they're actually using a VR headset, because the way the field of vision works, it may put things, more closely in front of them. But one of the options that I've considered, although I haven't had a chance to try it yet, is if I have people who are blind saying, hey, let's give you some kind of live audio description, some kind of a real-time narration of what's going on in the experience. So they would have, kind of a buddy acting there saying, hey, you've just arrived in this environment. You're in a courtyard. You see some stairs over to your left. You see an entrance to a lobby-way directly in front of you. The person would be able to hear all the conversation going on, and they may hear a conversation over to their right and say, hey, I'm going to head to my right. And then the guide might help them go and join that conversation. Now, AltSpace does include speech to text. So if you have people with audio impairments, you definitely want to ask them to turn that on, but it's not an overnight thing. It can take a couple of days for your event to be enabled for speech to text, and they will ask you to fill out a support request on the altvr.com site and explain why you want to use it. One of the cool things is if you're doing speech to text, it's not just English to English. It will actually also do real-time translation. So another inclusive thing that you may want to do if you have people in other languages, Japanese, French, is invite those people in and make sure they're going to know how to use that translation capability. And then they'll need to go into their control panel and set their language to Japanese, and then they'll be able to speak in Japanese. It will translate that out. And people who are using French would see it in French. People who are using English would see it in English. But allow extra time to set that up. If you have people who have different types of physical impairments, unfortunately, AltSpace at this time is not fully enabled for all of the types of screen readers and assistive technologies. So I encourage you to try to reach out to people in advance if you think you may have someone who's going to need some extra assistance, and see what it is that you can work out. Now, another type of accessibility thing that we do tend to think about these days is different types of sensory issues that people may have. And if you're in a very large conference hall in Orlando or Las Vegas, very often they will set aside a quiet room where people can go if they're having too much auditory or visual stimulation. And of course, the nice thing about virtual reality is if someone needs a break, all they need to do is turn off the headset or exit the app, take a break in their space, and then they can go back in at their leisure. But I have actually heard of groups setting up quiet rooms, quiet spaces. And with AltSpace, you can enforce that by making everybody mute within that space. And then they wouldn't have to leave the app or take off the headset. They could just pop into that adjacent space and then come back into the mainstream space when they're ready. I put a link there for AKAMS accessible events, and that's talking about how to do accessible physical and digital events, but they haven't really expanded into the VR capability yet. I'm hoping by having us do a lot more events, it's going to be something that'll be more common, and we'll have both more accommodations for accessibility within VR and more discussion about what we need to do to make truly inclusive events. Another thing that I will mention is there are some ways to view content within AltSpace, but because it's not fully accessible at this point, unless I'm going to do something like live streaming the event out so that people with different types of impairments would be able to still experience my content, I'm tending to use AltSpace right now a little bit more just for the social pieces, not for something where people would feel like there is content that I will be missing if I can't attend this event. And I'm not going to talk about streaming in this. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video, but it is possible to stream events from AltSpace out into something like YouTube directly. Another aspect of inclusivity is having standards of behavior. It's really important because, AltSpace is an open platform, and I've gone in there and I have seen some very inappropriate behavior. Now, it is possible to report people, and we'll talk about how to kick people out later. But as a moderator, you definitely want to have people on point as moderators who can kick out anybody who is behaving inappropriately. I've never had that problem at a professional event, but you may be hosting a professional event that is open in some way, and we'll talk about the different kinds of private and public that you can do later. So definitely having someone around who can remove people and have it clearly stated what your code of conduct is. As a Microsoft person, if I'm going to do a Microsoft event, I have a specific Microsoft code of conduct that I have to post at every event, and we post it whether it's a digital event, in-person event, and I post them in my VR events. And if somebody is violating that code of conduct, make sure your participants know what to do. Make sure they know the name of the moderators in there so that they can find those people and message them. Maybe have the moderators dress differently, have their avatars specifically attired in some way so it's easy to find those people. And really, as you're thinking about this, you need to think about the inclusivity right up front. So if you have underrepresented populations, like, a lot of my events tend to have a lot more guys than a lot more women. Well, and so I'm a woman, so I'm bringing that perspective. But, I may want to bring in other people. If I have people who I think may have different types of physical accessibility needs, I want to bring those people in as soon as I possibly can. Now, the last thing to think about in terms of this kind of, event considerations is AltSpace is free. And, as a free platform, they don't necessarily have a service level agreement there. There's no 100% guarantee that this platform is going to be up and running exactly at that moment that you need it. So I would say always have a backup plan. And remember when I said you should have a lobby that you start in? That's another really good reason to have that lobby. If your VR event were suddenly inaccessible for some reason, at least you could bring people back into that lobby space, and you've already got your Zoom or your Teams or your, WebEx, whatever environment set up that you can bring people into. And the Altspace team is on the small side. So you can go and you can file support requests if you're going to do an event. And if it's going to be a large one, I definitely recommend doing that. But keep in mind that it's not like they have a lot of people who are just able to sit around and say, great, I'm going to come in and help you run your event. So I've definitely built my own support network. I have people both within Microsoft and outside of Microsoft, depending on the kind of events that I'm doing. And if I say, hey, I need some moderators, I know I have people who I can tap to do that. Now, AltSpace is very much a Discord-based community. So I strongly encourage you to go out to the altvr.com site, look up their support pages, and it will tell you how to get onto that Discord server. And there are channels on that Discord server for world builders if you want people to help you, figure out how to make your space better. There are channels on there for events, and you can post your event. There's also a channel on there where you can say, hey, I am doing an event and I need moderators. And there are people who are community helpers out there, or people who want to be community helpers who will say, great, I will show up and I will help you moderate your event. And I talk about event moderation a little bit in creating the invites video. And eventually I'm going to get around to doing one where we'll talk through all the hosting tools and what the moderators can do within those hosting tools. But you definitely want people on your side who can help you out. If you're going to do the lobby concept, I usually start off in the lobby and I'm being the tech support and helping people in. So I tap some people to be in world to do that greeting and to show people how to use the interactables and to get the conversation started. Oh, and I would say that's another big tip about inclusive environments. I try to, if I possibly can, I try to get 3 or 4 people already in there so there's some conversations going on at first. One of the things I find that can get a bit awkward is if the party grows very gradually, then everybody tends to be in one big clump. So it's also good to have some kind of activity going on, some kind of an icebreaker that you can do that's going to encourage them to break up into smaller groups and start having those conversations, because then they'll move around a little bit more freely. If everybody's all just in one conversation, you may as well be in teams in some respects. So, encourage them to move around and break up. All right, so we talked about event considerations. Now we need to think about capacity and flow. And when I'm thinking about this, the question that's always top of my mind is, what am I doing in this event? Am I going to be about presenting content? Because yes, I'm going to stream it so it's accessible. Am I trying to do a social event? Am I trying to do a very large presentation? Am I trying to do some kind of a small gathering? And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that a single space within AltSpace can only have 50 avatars in it at any given time. If the 51st person tries to enter that event, it's going to say, I'm sorry, this event is full, and they will not be able to get in until somebody else leaves and somebody else then can join the event and take it up to the 50 capacity again. But there are definitely ways that you can get around this. So don't think that if you want to have 200 people that you're stuck. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of different concepts that I use here. Front row is kind of the main one that's built in, but I'm going to start by talking about what I call linked spaces, and then I'll show you some other kind of variations on those linked spaces with the named spaces. So if I'm going to do a social event, I may want to have more than one environment set up. So I may have a lobby within the event, not the Teams or Zoom lobby I talked about a few minutes ago, but an actual lobby space within that people go to, and then I can have teleporters, because yes, you can have teleporters in AltSpace, and I need to do a video that shows you how to set up teleporters. But then you could have the teleporters going to the dance party and the trivia. And the great thing about this is people will kind of self-balance. So they may be more interested in the trivia than the dance party, or the dance party's trivia. But if the dance party is full, then they say, well, okay, that's full. I guess I'll try going to the trivia. Or they may just hang out in the lobby. Now, you may not want to have too many people in your lobby, so you may want to, spread them out across other spaces. But the other thing that I have to caution you about is not having too many linked spaces to start off with, because if people spread out too much, you don't get that conversation effect. So what I may actually do is what I call linked spaces with backup, where I'll just start with the lobby and some other thing. And then I'll have an event set to what is called draft mode. And I talk about that in the invites video. But draft mode means it's just kind of there and ready. And then if I need more space because my lobby and my trivia are starting to get full, then I can go and take it out of draft, and I can have a teleporter just waiting in those other spaces that I can bring online. Very often what I'll do is I'll put the teleporter stored below the floor surface so that nobody sees it. And all I have to do is set it so that it's up at the floor level, so it's suddenly usable to get into that additional space. You do have to really watch your spaces carefully. You don't want it to get full and have people getting blocked out of entering the event with these linked spaces. So what AltSpace gives you is something called front row. And the cool thing about front row is you can have as many instances of a room as you need, so that you can have your presenter, like I got my little DJ there, who is actually in room number 1. But then there's a room number 2 that's an exact duplicate, and a 3 that's a duplicate, and a 10 and a 20. And if you want to have 500 people, you just need 10 rooms that are all set up like that. And then what'll happen is people will start joining room 1. But as soon as a moderator or a host enters one of those other rooms, it's going to open it up and people will be able to start joining those other rooms. And so eventually you could have someone in, 3 of your 4 spaces out there. And what's kind of cool is if people in those other rooms send emojis, then the people in room 1 will see it. So if somebody is up there presenting in room 1 and, they're really excited and the audience is loving it, the presenters will be able to see all of the hearts and the claps and all of the emojis that are going on out there. And there's also a capability in AltSpace where people can raise hands to ask questions. So if you're going to do a Q&A session later, the people in room 1 would be controlling the main thing here as the moderators, and they would be able to see hand raises across all of the other spaces. And they can do what's called putting those other people on air. So like this person over in dance party 3 who's raising their hand, they could be put on air so that everybody in rooms 1, 2, and 4, and 12 can see them as they're asking their question. So it's a great concept. It will let you scale infinitely to whatever you need. And now it's very easy to set up. It's just some settings that you do when you create your invite. But some things to think about. Only the moderators and the hosts can move easily between the rooms. So on the host panel, they get a little extra thing called rooms, and it will show all the rooms that are available. And they can say, I want to go to room 6 or I want to go to room 5. But the attendees may not realize that there are different rooms involved. So somebody in room 2 may say, hey, meet me back by the popcorn machine. And somebody goes back and says, well, I'm by the popcorn machine and I don't see you. That's because they're in room 2 and the other person is in room 8 by the popcorn machine. So for that, that's one of the reasons why I prefer for purely social things using those link spaces instead, because somebody can say, hey, I'm in the alt space room, or I'm in the alt trivia room, and the other person can say, great, I'm in the dance room. I'm going to come find you in the trivia room. And then you can say, yeah, I'm by the popcorn machine in the trivia room. There's only one place to do it. Now, another thing that they've added in AltSpace, which is cool, is if you have a friend relationship with another account, as you go in, you'll be able to see anyone with those friend relationships. And it'll say you have 2 friends in room 5 and 1 friend in room 8. And then you've just got to decide, do I want to go to room 5 or room 8, or do I just want to duck the question and just enter the event and have it randomly assign me to a room there? And as I mentioned earlier, when the moderator enters the space, it's open. So if you have 5 rooms, you don't want to open up 2, 3, 4, 5 until room 1 starts to get too crowded. And if you need to, you can add rooms on the fly, and then people will be able to just start, trickling into those additional spaces there. But if you think people might get confused and, if you don't want to have different types of spaces, another approach to it is what I call named duplicated spaces. So I could just have a lounge, but I can also create another one called Overflow Lounge 1 that's online and Overflow Lounge 2 that's online. And I can just assign those, some kind of a URL that's out there. And I could give all of my attendees all 3 links to get into these events. So if somebody tries to get into Lounge and it's full, they'll get the full message and they say, okay, well, it's full. I guess I'll go to Overflow Lounge 1. And if Overflow Lounge 1 is full, then they'll try Overflow Lounge 2. So you can have all of those set up all the way in advance. And if you can do link redirection, like with Microsoft, we use AKA MS links, and I can redirect that. So what I might do is start by having my lounge point to the original lounge, but then as that one gets full, I may go in and alter my redirection. And now everybody who's just using AKA MS lounge is going to be automatically directed to lounge 1. And when that one gets too full, I redirect it again. So everybody's automatically ending up in Overflow 2. And then it would be up to me to decide if I want to put teleporters between them or just say, hey, you have all of the links and you can just, jump between the rooms as you like. So that's what I think about in terms of capacity and flow. Then the last big piece that I always think about is how restricted does my event need to be? Because you can have very private events in here if you want to, or you can have things that are completely open to the public. But it's going to impact how you structure your event, how you publicize your event, how you give people the link to get into your events. So the important thing to know is, first of all, you can kick people out of any event. And this is where one of the things that's a little bit different than the concept of world. When you create an event, you build it in a world, and then you get tools like the moderating tools and the ability to kick people out. If you're doing a world and you say that world is open for anybody to enter, then you don't have the same kick kind of capability going on here. So this is one of the reasons why we use events. And then what you would do to kick somebody out is you can either from the host control panel, you can find all of the people in attendance there and you can kick them from there, or you can hover over their name tag. And there's a little shoe icon there, and that would kick somebody out of the event. What I strongly recommend, this is advice I got from educators in VR, which is very good advice, is if you have people who are moderating, mute the person first, because if they're doing something inappropriate, it's very likely that they're saying things that you really just don't want other people hearing. It's very disturbing. So mute them first and then kick, mute, kick, mute, kick. So when you come in to kick them, it's going to say, why are you kicking them? And things like trolling, people who are coming in and saying, deliberately provocative things. You definitely want to log those in there. And, if it's something just like a noisy microphone, well, they're not going to get kicked off of AltSpace necessarily for that. But people who are trolling, bullying, sexual harassment, those people are going to get kicked off of the platform. Now, there's nothing to stop them from going out and creating another account and coming in with another account. But at least it's going to slow them down in some way. And as you're kicking, you do have the option to say whether or not they can get back into that event. So if it's something like a noisy microphone, you might just want to kick them out and say, hey, go fix that, but then they can come back in later. You also have to think about the style of event you're doing. And this is more great advice I got from educators in VR. There are events in AltSpace like the meditation events, which are zero tolerance. If you go in and you are at all disruptive, boom, you're out of there. But other people want to take a more coaching kind of approach to events and say, hey, if someone is saying something inappropriate, like for my Women IT Pros events that I run, if someone starts coming in and saying inappropriate things about women in technology, I would say, well, why you're thinking that? This is a women in tech event. If you want to sit here and listen to us and talk with us, you're welcome to stay. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you to leave. And if they don't leave, then I'm going to kick them out. But, I may give them at least a chance to try to join the conversation in an appropriate way. Because a lot of people are very new to AltSpace. They don't necessarily know, what the norms are in AltSpace in general or any particular event. I do post a code of conduct. I use that little welcome message and say, hey, if you're not behaving appropriately, we're going to kick you out. And if somebody starts coming in and using profanity, or, I've had some very inappropriate physical actions done with people in VR headsets, they're just out. I'm not going to put up with something like that. So even if it's a public event, you can kick people out. If it's a private event, you can kick people out. So what you really need to think about in terms of public and private is, how restricted do you need to be, and how easy or hard is it going to be for people to get into your event in the first place? Because remember, we already have roadblocks. And if you're going to make it a private event, you're going to be putting an additional roadblock on top of everything else. So really think about how private the conversation is. And to really get a sense of what we're talking about here, you have to think about how people can get into public events, because then that's going to change in a minute. We'll talk about how they can get into your private events or your group controlled events. So from the website is one of the ways to do it. So my Women IT Pros events are totally public. Everybody is welcome. 4th Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Please come join us. Happy to have you there. And I post those as main event. So it's very easy for people to find those. So when somebody goes to the event, if the event is actually in session at that moment, they will have a little enter now, and they can enter direct from the website. Now, if they are entering for the first, well, actually, anytime they enter from the website, you're going to get this little box here that says download AltspaceVR. And I find that people often get very confused the first time they're coming in here, because they say, well, wait a minute, I thought I already installed AltSpace. And maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But if they've already installed it, they should not click download AltSpace, because then, they'll always see this thing. They'll get in a bit of a loop here. So another way that people can enter is from the in-app event listings. And so they've already started AltSpace. They can go to the events tab, and if it is public, then they'll see it in here. Now, there are main events, and then there are all events, and they may have to kind of comb through if it's not something that's listed as a main event. But they should be able to find it somewhere under that event listing. And I just realized another thing that I haven't added a new slide in for is codes. They now have a new way to find events. Every event that's created has a code. So there is a title screen when you first come in, and one of the options there is to enter the code. So, whether it's a public or private event, you'll be able to get in using that code. If somebody has gone to the website first and clicked RSVP, like it shows at the top of the page there, then that's going to show up on their Interested tab. And the Interested tab will show up both on altvr.com, and it will show up inside of the app. So they can just go in and find whatever they said they were interested in, and then they'll be able to enter that event when it's actually in session. If they have a friend relationship, you can find your friends, and if the friend is in a public event, then you'll be able to go to them. If the friend is in a private event or in a world that's restricted, or something that's controlled by group access, then you're not going to be able to go to them. But as long as it's a public space, like one of the hubs or a public event, I can just hover over them. I can say go to, and I'll show up. And if there are multiple rooms, because they're using front row, it will actually give me a choice and say, hey, you have this friend in room 1 and this friend is in room 5. So if the friend I want is in room 5, I got to enter room 5 if I actually want to hang out with my friend. The reverse is also true. If it's a public event, very easy. I can send somebody who I have a friend relationship with a come visit, and it looks like you're just sending a message. And there are messages like you're muted and hello and goodbye. But there's also a message called come visit. And when you click that, it does more than just say come visit me. It actually puts in the space ID. And then that's going to pop up for the other person. As you can see on the right there, it's going to say come visit me. And here's the space ID. And they can either reply and say, hey, I can't come over right now, or they can click visit now, and it'll just take you right into that space. It will not work if that person is in a front row space that is already full. So if room 1 is full, and that person's in room 1, they may have to go to room 5 and then send the come visit, or somebody does the go to in a room that's actually going to have space for the new person to join. I mentioned teleporters. Here's what a teleporter looks like. They're awesome. And so you can link your worlds together using teleporters, and people will be able to get into these public event spaces. So, if my event is public and I have 3 spaces, I can just link them all together. People put them in worlds all the time, so you can hop around between the different worlds. And then another way of traveling is by portal. So you'll notice when you're looking at an event information, you have a choice between enter portal or info. If it's just you going in, just enter. You don't need a portal. But if I want to go to an event and I want to take some people with me, I can put up a portal, and it's going to put up this glowing ball there, and it says, hey, your portal to the common trendings news. And everybody who clicks that then will be attached to my portal. And then how it says click or enter to launch, if I am throwing the portal, then I'm the one who clicks the enter, and everybody who is attached to my portal is going to travel with me. Now, portal etiquette in AltSpace. If you are in somebody else's event, it is considered rude to throw a portal to your own event or your own other world space. If you're doing something like a world tour, at the end, they may invite you to say, hey, let's portal together to some of your worlds, and then everybody kind of goes together so they can explore new worlds. But it's rude to siphon people off of an existing event. So if you really want to travel somewhere with somebody, go into a neutral space first, like a home space, or create a different meeting space, or just one person jumps there and then everybody else does the come follow, because you set up the friend relationships first. So those are all the ways that you can get into public events. But when you're creating an event, one of the options you have is to make it a private event, and you can make that private event restricted to just group access. So it's possible to go out into altvr.com, and under the more option, you have groups, and you can create as many groups as you would like. And then when you're creating your event, you can decide that you want to only allow specific groups, and you can assign more than one group to an event. Groups can have administrators, and groups also end up with what's called a commons space, which can be pretty cool. So that group can always just kind of pop in and have a ready-made space that they're allowed to meet in. So I like groups, but the problem with adding people to the groups is over on the right there, you can see what the group form looks like. And you have to decide if you're going to add people based on email addresses or AltSpace account names. You can't use both. If you're going to use email addresses, the email address must be the exact same email address they used when they created their AltSpace account. So bensmith@microsoft.com is not the same as bsmith@microsoft.com. And so people can get very confused with that. If you're doing something like an Eventbrite event, and then you're going to export the list of email addresses and then import them into this, you probably want to have people try to make sure that they've got the right thing first, and they have a help desk where they can come back to and say, hey, I'm trying to get in. It's not letting me in. It's saying I'm not in the group, because they may have used a variant of the email address. It's not letting them in. The other option is to use the Altspace account name. And that is not the same as the display name. And very often people will give you the display name instead of the account name. The display name can be anything and people can change that anytime they want, but the account name is the thing that does not change. And sometimes now when people are using the single sign-on with the MSA account, they're getting these really long, complicated names like MSAL underscore number, and trying to get those added in correctly can be a bit of a pain as well. So I only use groups if I really need to restrict access. I manage some of our most valued professionals, and so I did some events at our MVP Summit, and I really wanted that to only be MVP. So I did have to use groups. And you know, it was a lot of troubleshooting, and sometimes people would be added to the group and they try to get in and it still wasn't working and we didn't know why. But you know, groups really will keep anybody out who is not part of that group. And after you've created your group, then here's on the invite where you would go to select it, and you can use control click to select multiple group IDs that you have created. So if you've assigned somebody to the group, remember all those ways we talked about entering from the website, from the in-app, they can go to, they can come visit, portals, teleporters, and those new event codes that are part of the ways of getting in. All of those work if the event is restricted to the group and they are in that group, or at least it should work. If it doesn't, you know, file a support request, send feedback, you know, make sure that they know so they can figure out, you know, why that group isn't working. If you decide to make your event private, but you don't add a group to it, anybody who has the link can still get into that event. But, you know, that's like Teams. You know, if I give you the Teams link, anybody can get in. It's just in Teams, I may have a little bit more way of telling who is actually in that event. You know, I can maybe actually see their video, or, you know, I may be able to see their name more. If I see a name I don't recognize, then I'm just going to kick them out because I'm going to assume that everybody else are people I'm going to recognize. So if you have made the event private when you are creating it, you'll have the event URL, and you'll also have the event code. So this is one of the reasons why they set up codes, is to help people enter these private events. So anybody who has that link can go to the website. They will see the event listing there. And as long as the event is currently running, they'll be able to click enter and go in because they were able to find that web page. Now, what's interesting is people who have headsets don't go in through the browser. They're already in the app. And so they aren't going to be able to see the app unless they go to the web page first outside of their headset, then click RSVP. And then when they're in app, remember there was that interested page that I showed you, they'll be able to see it on their interested tab and they'll be able to enter from there. Or now if they have the code, they'll also be able to go back to the title screen. And from the title screen, there's a place to say enter code, and they'll be able to use their, you know, their heads up display keyboard to enter in that six, it's an alphanumeric code, and they'll be able to enter the event that way. So that's definitely made doing private events a lot easier since they brought that out. If they want to use go to friend, it's going to work if it's through a group. But if it's just a regular private event where there's no group assigned, they're not going to be able to go to that friend. And in fact, the friend won't even be able to see the name of the event that they're in. So that's going to be true for both for come to, or I'm sorry, to go to friend, to a portal, to a teleporter. Those aren't going to work there. So it can be more complicated to get people into the event. If you're going to do that, I definitely recommend showing people how to use those alphanumeric event codes to get directly into your space. Now, another thing that you can do is when you're creating the event, it's possible to make it public but unlisted. So private events are automatically unlisted. Nobody sees them. They're never going to show up on the website or in the in-app listing there. But you can make it public but unlisted. So it's not going to show up on the website. But remember that go to friend, come visit, teleporters, portals, all of those will work. So your unlisted public event, yeah, you may have people who just wander in it. I've had that happen. I'm doing an event, all of a sudden somebody's in there. It's like, oh, great. Well, because I made this public and just unlisted. So sure, it's fine that you're here. Glad to see you. But it won't be on the in-app listing. It won't show you like that. It won't show on the popular events listing as well, where it shows, hey, this event has, 40 people in it. And then people start, oh, 40 people, that sounds cool. And they pop in there. So it can make it a little bit easier for people to get into the unlisted public events. But, just be prepared that random people may show up. So this is then where we have to talk a little bit about privacy. People have to create an account, and that username is set, but the display name can be changed to anything. So somebody can go and say, hey, I want to be Mickey Mouse today. And sometimes I may go into some events where I don't want my full name visible across everything. And so I may just put it as my first name, or I may just, make it echo what my account name is, Word Girl. If you're going to make the change, then you have to do it at the website at altvr.com under your profile. And then you have to exit the app and go back in again if you're already in it. You won't see the change until you enter the whole app, not just the event, the whole app. So if you're doing some kind of professional event, you probably want to set the expectation or the standard that everybody is going to use their actual name as their display name. And if they aren't, if somebody shows up as, somebody showed up at one of my events with Devil in Disguise, and I'd say, who are you? Okay, would you mind going and changing your name? Because, we're all friends here. We're all working in the same team. We want to know who's in here. But avatars do not need to look like the actual person. One of my favorite people in VR, Andy, shows up as a bearded kind of male figure. And now at this point, everybody knows that as Andy. If Andy ever changes her avatar, people are going to be really confused. But some people are really good at making a digital twin. And my gosh, when Aaron walks into that room, it's like, that's Aaron. I know that's Aaron. I'd know Aaron anywhere. But you just have to be careful, because who you're talking to may not be the actual person that you think it is. And even when you friend somebody, you don't get additional profile information. It's something that I'm hoping will show up eventually, like, with Xbox, you can see a little bit of their gamer profile as much as they've chosen to share. So, a lot of times I'll accept any friend request. If you friend me, I will accept it. But, that means I walk into events and I have 10 friends in here. I don't know who any of them are, because, I don't know what their display name is showing. So your friends can see you if you are in public spaces, and you may not want that. Now, there is another option that they have added in your settings now. You actually, under menu, you can go to the Me tab, and you can change what your status looks like. So you can always appear offline even when you're in there. Of course, then that can really freak people out if you're actually trying to, connect with some people. So you have to remember to change what your status looks like. Chatting is something you can only do with people you have friend relationships with, or if you are in an event, the attendees can always chat the moderators and host, and the host and moderators can always chat the attendees. That's how you get the communication that you need to say something like, hey, your mic is really noisy. Can you turn it down? It is also possible now, there's a setting that they've put in where as a host or moderator, you can pause messages. So like when you're presenting, you may not want people to be messaging you saying, hey, because it can get really distracting from your presentation. I mentioned earlier that it's possible for hosts and moderators to kick people out of events. But just as an individual, if somebody is doing something that I find annoying or offensive, I can block them and I will stop seeing them. And I can also do a one-on-one mute of them. So I was in a VR meetup once, and there was this kid who got on stage and was singing this really annoying song very loudly, and they'd left the microphone in there. So, they were on megaphone, everybody could hear them. So I just muted them. And even though they were on megaphone, I stopped hearing them and I could go on and have my other conversations. And, that was benign. If I was a moderator, I'd probably go up to that person and say, hey, this is not what we're doing here. Can you come off that? Now we get rid of the microphone if we're not actually using it. But anybody who's blocked. Now, when I block somebody, it is going to ask me why I'm blocking them. And if I'm blocking them because they're doing offensive behavior, too many of those blocks, and that's going to pull the attention of the AltspaceVR team to maybe decommission that account. So another aspect of this is confidentiality. Like we said, even if you do a private event, if you have the link, you can get in. So, in Teams, somebody may show up at your event. And I've had that, especially someone calls in because their computer isn't working. All of a sudden you see this telephone number and we're like, who is this person? Can you tell us who you are? And say, oh yeah, I'm Bev. Oh, it's like, okay, great, Bev, glad you're here. But you do want to think about that when you're doing events. If you're going to be presenting any kind of information, that you don't want somebody just able to show up. So even if you make it a private event, remember, if somebody shares that link, they could give it to somebody else. Somebody else could come in and impersonate them and be in that group there. So one thing that you can do, if you're going to have a lobby space, either the lobby in Zoom or Teams, or you can have the lobby in the AltspaceVR itself, you can force people to check in. And especially if I'm doing groups, when I did the MVP Summit and I had the groups there, I was having everybody give me their AltspaceVR account name, and I was adding into the group at that time. And then if they tried to get in and it still wasn't working, they could come back into the Teams call. I could have them figure out. Usually what I'll have them do is send me a screenshot of their user profile that shows both their username and their account name. And then I'm sure I'm getting the actual account name and that I'm spelling it correctly, and punctuation or dashes or whatever. So that's helpful. Or if you have them coming directly into AltspaceVR, you can have them check in with the group. And going from one AltspaceVR to another event space, like if you have teleporters, remember the teleporters are going to restrict people. So if you have a private event, people aren't going to be able to just teleport into it. But if you have the group set up and say, great, now I'll be able to teleport into that other event. And if that doesn't work, they can come back to, that first lobby space. And then, we can fix it and make sure that they're in the appropriate group there. Now, another thing that you might want to do is, when you're checking people in, you could also set up some other kind of, additional factor authentication. So you can say, someone comes up and says, hey, I'm Ben Smith at Microsoft.com. And you can say, okay, Ben, I've just sent you an email. Tell me the code that I sent you. And then if somebody else is in there trying to impersonate Ben Smith, then, they're not going to be able to have that code. And, you'll know you don't have the real Ben Smith. So, additional overheads, but you got to think about how important it is to restrict people from this event here. Now, one of the things that I toyed with was the idea of having a check-in desk within the same space. So for example, if you look at the auditorium, there's a little kind of an alley off to the side, and then you come into the courtyard, and then there's a door before you go into the main auditorium. So you could theoretically set your spawn point out in that little kind of alleyway, and then you could have blockers that will prevent people from going through that space until you've checked them in and say, yes, you bought a ticket, or, you're on my list. So that would keep the avatar out of the space as long as you can make it so they can't teleport past whatever the barrier is. But if your content is going to be presented with somebody on megaphone, that's like the microphone for the whole space, then even if they're in that alleyway, they're going to be able to hear what the content is, even if they can't see the slides. So that may not be an option. Maybe you're just concerned about, keeping them out from the dance floor, but you don't really care if they hear the dance music. If you really need to make it a private space, then you're going to want to have spaces with teleporters in between, and then probably use the groups between them. But if somebody wants to have a private conversation, if the space is large, you can just walk somewhere else and you can have your conversation, and you'll still be able to hear things in the background, and other people will be able to hear your conversation a little bit in the background. Another interesting thing is that walls are not actually sound barriers in AltspaceVR. So if you're standing in the lobby, just inside the door, and somebody else is standing next to the kitchen on the other side of that wall, you'll be able to hear them. Or if you're standing upstairs in the auditorium or the trivia space, you can hear people who are talking downstairs below you. So your private conversation may not be truly private. If you really need to have a truly private conversation, you have the option to decide whether people can enter your home space. And if you've set it so that that's possible, you can just say, hey, let's go to my home space. And remember, throwing a portal might be rude, but you can just pop into your home space and then send them a come visit. Or you can pop in and then say, do a go to and go and find me in that space. Or you can create events while you're in AltspaceVR. It's very easy. It's just a couple of clicks on the event tab, go to my event, say create a new event. Boom, it's going to fill in all the stuff that you need, and you can just pop into that new event space, talk all you want, and then both of you can pop back into the main event space. So we talked about all the things you need to think about when you're putting together your event. You need to think about how you're going to get them into Altspace in the first place, how you're going to get them over whatever barriers that they may have, how to make a really inclusive and welcoming event with things like a code of conduct and thinking about accessibility. And you need to think about support. Make sure you have a backup plan. Make sure you have a lobby or a help desk that people can get to. We talked about the capacity and flow, where you're going to only have 50 people per space, but there are different ways that you can manage that space by combining spaces, either linking them with teleporters or giving them all of the links to all the different spaces so they can self-load balance, or use something like front row that will force them to load balance across the spaces. And then we talked about ways to get into the event. We talked about public events. We talked about private events with group access, or private events where people just have the link. And definitely in that case, if you're doing a private event, those new event codes are your friend. So that's everything I have to say about thinking about planning events. And I hope you are going to go out and start making your own events real soon.